And welcome back, footy fans. Ladies and gentlemen, we are recording this, at least for three of us, still in 2021. And I thought it would be a great idea to chat footy on the last day of 2021 going into 2022. This is our AFL offseason and draft review. I am going to be for this show your host, Coach Donnie Hess, here with my normal host, Mr. Ross Allen, joining us, and also joining us, a special guest from the Steez and Don podcast. The Steez joining us. Khalil, how are you doing, sir? How are things in Georgia?
Doing very well. Georgia's pretty bad with COVID, to be honest with you, but other than that, everything's good this way. Weather's not too bad. It's not snowing here, and footy's still going around worldwide, so I love it.
Absolutely love it. And why we're here, we'll do a little shout out again. Huge congratulations to you with the Grovetown Pirates becoming the 51st US AFL club. Congratulations, sir. Your hard work has been recognized. Keep it up. Congratulations. Much success to you and the Pirates. And last but not least, but certainly not least, the man, the myth, the legend that is Pete Williams, co-editor of Rookie Me Central and my draft expert, the man I swear I cannot stump when it comes to drafting. Peter, it's 2022 where you are. What do we have to look forward to, and how are you doing? How is Melbourne?
Yeah, thanks for that, Donnie. Yeah, it's only really been 12 hours so far, so can't really definitively say whether 2022 is going to be better, but I kind of go by the theory that it can't be any worse, really. So hopefully it keeps going the way it is, which will be really good. But looking forward to this. You know, the drafts was late November, and the players are working their way back to get into preseason training, and then really kicking off in a couple of months, which will be really exciting.
Absolutely fantastic. But I got to ask for my two rookies, Ross and Steez, I got to ask, guys, how was kind of your first drafting experience? I mean, what was something surprised you? What was something that kind of shocked you about the Aussie rules draft?
You know what? I think I just got to say that I don't understand it still. When it comes to the whole bidding and like with all the drafts that I know in my head, it's still taking me some time to wrap my head around it, essentially. But, you know, I'm starting to get the hang of it, just like, just watching footy itself, slowly but surely understanding the sport as a whole and the off season as a whole. But yeah, no, I still need to get that through my thick skull because it's just not clicking at this point.
Yeah, for me, I would say I didn't really have too many expectations because I know that it is way different than the NFL, the NBA, just MLB, just all the draft process. But we also keep in mind that we do have our supporters who constantly let us know and fill us in on things that we're not familiar with. So we weren't too lost because we watched the draft live on YouTube, and they were pretty much just telling us what was going on if we were ever confused. But the thing that definitely it was surprising me was when people were just passing over their picks, because it would just happen over and over and over. And I didn't expect that. Nobody really warned me for that at all. And so I'm like waiting for Carlton's pick. And I'm like, okay, Carlton coming up. Boom. And they trade him. Like, are they just pass off on him? I'm like, oh, we had somebody we could have got, man. Come on, we're not that good. But
I think with the passing thing is that they also have to keep spots open for the rookie drafts and then the supplemental drafts and different things like that. But it's basically if your list is full, then you pass because you can't really draft anybody without taking up an extra spot. I mean, am I right on that, Pete?
Yeah. No, I'm glad you guys have no clue about what happens, because that's how I feel when I look at American sports when they're doing drafts and leagues and everything like that. I'm like, I got no idea what's going on here. So it's good to be the one person, I guess, in the chat that's got so familiar with it where, yeah, if you're talking any of the American sports, I'd have no idea. So same boat here for that. But definitely, yeah, the passing, they've got list numbers they've got to make. Sometimes if they've got late selections, they might be tossing up between a couple of people, but rather than commit to a 2-year contract, they can ask them to come and train with them. And then after a month or two in the lead up to the season, they can basically select them, and they only have to put them on a 1-year deal. So then it's kind of like they can do for more, but they can just put them on a 1-year deal. And basically that way they come on, train with them. They've got used to what they're like. They get used to their personalities, whether they're going to be a good fit, whether they're training really well, that kind of thing. So it's just like a non-committal kind of aspect where they've chosen to pass and they're trying to work out which player they want to go with. And also, if they get an injury over the preseason, like if a team's really low on rucks, for example, they may well invite a couple of rucks to come down and then see whether they pick one, or perhaps if there's an injury over the preseason, then they can select a player that they've got training with them based on that position that they can have an immediate fill rather than completely filling their list. And they've got no wriggle room in that sense to replace them. So it is really handy in that way. It's just more flexible. It is very confusing, and then we didn't always have it. It's only been around the last few years, but definitely that and the bidding rules can be a bit complicated, because even I think there's a lot of Australians at times that with bidding rules that constantly change and things like that, that everyone gets a bit confused. So you kind of just roll with it as it goes, really.
See, I appreciate the explanation, because to me, that sounds just like, NFL and that kind of stuff. Undrafted free agent. That's something I can wrap my head around for our American listeners. Just in that it's an undrafted free agent. We all know how that works. We're all pretty comfortable with that fact. So thank you. I understand something now.
Yeah, and the biggest thing with the bidding is it kind of it depends on where the position is, because each pick is a certain amount of points, and then they have changed the rules. The new NGA Academy rule that if you try to draft a player from an NGA Academy inside the top 20, that you cannot match the bid. So it was a little bit of a different thing, because if they would have done this rule the previous season, Jamaro Ugle-Hagan would have went number one, not to the Western Bulldogs, but to the number one overall team, to the first overall pick. So they've kind of made some rule changes. You have your father's son, which again is the same kind of matching bid, things like that. I'm not going to say I'm an expert, because again, as Pete says, they change the rules a little bit. So sometimes it takes you a little bit to kind of catch up a little bit. So I'm going to hop into it before we get full on into the draft. I know we can talk a ton. Just talking Ross and Steez. I mean, you guys kind of saw some of the trades. I know I relayed some of the information. Was there any player that moved, in your guys' personal opinions, that kind of surprised you a little bit, or you're very intrigued in where they went?
Ross, you want to go first? You want me to take it?
I will take a look at this, because I could kind of speak since it was a GWS player on here one. The whole Finlayson to Port Adelaide. That one, I don't know if I want to say it surprised me, but it was something where it's interesting just because of the impact that he had on GWS this season. A future third round pick was handy, but at the same time, I just guess I wasn't expecting that kind of name to be moved over this draft period.
I can wholeheartedly agree with that. I think that's a good pick for Port. I think that's good for Port to get, in my opinion. I think they'll make use of them. I was surprised by Peter Laddams letting where did he go? To Sydney, right? I was surprised by that. I think that's a good pickup for y'all. And then myself, just with the whole Liam Jones retirement, I want to see what Lewis Young will do, if they really think he's that guy down there on the back line in Carlton. So I'm interested in that. I'm also interested in Chera, just to see how he's going to help complement our midfield, but more so that back line I'm interested in, just because they're both going to have to work together well, just to see them both work, to see it mesh well and to improve on what we had going last year. So
very, very interesting. Pete, any of the moves that kind of, even any of the free agents that you're intrigued on where they went?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I sort of, as a whole, I think a lot of the trading was quite interesting. It's kind of been a bit of the live trading's made it really interesting, because they've got to try and bring some players and look to next year. Like I know Brisbane have a kid called Will Ashcroft who's under their father's son next year, so they had to try and bring in a lot of kids, a lot of picks for next year, and then they've also got a lot of players that are sort of coming. This year they've brought in the 3 players and they've had to get more picks next year, where Collingwood, for example, had to get the picks in this year for Dacos. So I think that a lot of those kind of moves have been really, really beneficial, like trying to get the picks in that players can potentially, go to clubs they want in exchange for picks, and then they on-trade it to those who have this whole academy system with bidding and everything like that. So for me, I think that the more tactical side around everything was the thing that really interested me. Obviously, Chera coming to Carlton was one of the names that I thought was, quite interesting. I think Petrevsky Seaton also going over to West Coast over there was interesting. I think that if everything clicks, he'll be a really good pickup there. So, and yeah, Laddams to Sydney will be a great get for them as well. But I think that everyone really managed to build up their list, or in a lot of cases anyway. And I mean, Collingwood even getting Pat Lipinski, I think he'll be really good for the Pies. So, yeah, he's very skillful in what they need. So there wasn't necessarily massive names that got traded or shifted around this year, but there was certainly a lot of players that could really slot in and do really well. So, yeah.
What are your thoughts on Amsterdam to Carlton?
I think that he'll fit in really well. Like I saw him, and again, this is showing how far I've sort of gone back. When he played at Eastern Rangers, he was a very classy sort of type, and he's shown that in patches for Fremantle. I think that coming up against, in that midfield, you've obviously got Nat Fyfe and things like that, where this coming to Carlton, he'll have Paddy Cripps and Sam Walsh. So I feel like he'll probably be able to slot in as almost that third or fourth midfielder, which will really, really help. Obviously, the others have developed around him, like Brayshaw at the Dockers, but I think that he is someone who could come in and offer something different. He doesn't have to win that hard ball per se, which at times he might have to do if like Fyfe was out or things like that. So I think like he's someone who can almost exclusively play that sort of clean outside skillful role while still playing that sort of inside. So what I sort of call a second possession winner. So they're not on the ground shoveling it out, but they're the ones that are inside. They win the ball and then go off. So that's his kind of go. He's able to use the ball and able to distribute it forward. So I think that he's someone that, yeah, it certainly fits what Carlton need, because they've got that sort of inside ball win in Cripps, and obviously Walsh can do everything. So yeah, I think he adds to that midfield for the Blues.
And that first and third is a fair, or the first and then future third, is that a fair kind of price for them?
Yeah, look, I think Carlton probably paid marginally over, I think, but they kind of had to, because at the same time, there's no guarantee with the selection they had that you're going to get a player that will fit the needs that he did. And I think Carlton knew that as well as Fremantle knew that. So where obviously this year WA had a lot of top-end talent that are from Western Australia, so they knew that they could bring in some local players and keep them there, which so that, a Chera scenario didn't happen again, where someone from interstate perhaps wanted to go home, so they know they can bring in some WA kids and they're already at home. So I think it was marginally over, but not to a point of where it was ridiculous. I think they paid a little bit over, but then that's the sort of buyer's market. He was probably one of the better players on offer in terms of either free agents or players up for trade. So I think they probably in the end had to do it, and there would have been other clubs that were keen. So yeah, it fits a need. So it probably is better for them long term.
I will say, my co-star Juwan, he also said he was interested, most interested in Shesky Seaton going over to the West Coast, because he's a West Coast supporter, and so he's very happy with the speed, potentially off halfback or wherever they may put him. He's just happy about the pace. So, and I also want to add, I also like the Jordan Clark to Freo too. I like that as well.
Yeah, no, I think he's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah, his pace will be fun with some of the speedsters out in Freo. I think Freo was one of the teams that I think in the trade period did a lot. They did a lot with what they did, bringing in, even losing Chera. I still think they did very, very well. But I think the biggest part of this chat is going to be the draft, and I'll start off with the first question for Pete. And this is maybe my thing is that we have a lot of those 1 and 2. The question is Jason Horne-Francis, Nick Dacos. In your personal opinion, and I know this is an opinion and everybody's different, who makes the bigger impact next season? Is it Jason Horne-Francis at a depleted North Melbourne team, or is it Dacos in a midfield where he's got a lot of experience to learn off of?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I feel like Dacos might have the slight upper hand at first, mainly because he's not going to have to win that hard ball like the inside. I feel like Horne-Francis will probably be outstanding. Like they're both going to be absolute, outstanding players. And I do sometimes laugh when we sort of compare this player or this player. It's kind of like, do you want, Nat Fyfe or Patrick Dangerfield as a kind of thing? Like not that they're necessarily them. But like that kind of, they're both going to be superstars. So I don't know what, everyone's too worried about with those two. But I think Horne-Francis will play more inside. He'll probably also spend a lot of time forward. So unfortunately for North fans, that doesn't mean he's going to see a lot of it necessarily, because I do think that they'll probably still struggle next year. I think they're a very exciting team, and I think they will be future finalists, but probably not next season. They're probably going to be another season where they're sort of down, rebuilding. And of course, unfortunately, Ben Cunnington getting another diagnosis bout with cancer, which is unfortunate, which means that he's their best player when he's up and firing. So it means Horne-Francis will probably play a lot in the midfield. Obviously, they've been able to get Hugh Greenwood to play that role too. They brought him in from the Suns, which was a really, really sneaky sort of great get that they've got there. So I think Horne-Francis will probably play 70-30 forward mid, where I think Dacos will still spend a lot of time forward, but he won't be deep forward, where I think Horne-Francis probably will. He might play out of a pocket and lead out and that kind of thing, where I think that Dacos will probably play off half forward and then swing onto a wing to rotate, that kind of thing. I don't think he'll necessarily get a heap of inside minutes, but he should get a fair bit of outside minutes. And he's such a lovely kick of the ball when he can have time and space, and he's so impactful up forward. So I feel like he's someone who could potentially kick, a goal a game very easily at AFL level. And I think he's going to be someone who complements Collingwood. He doesn't have to go in and do too much, because Collingwood does have a lot of those inside ball winners that can do a lot. Taylor Adams, for example. And, they've brought in guys as well, like Lipinski, as we mentioned. He'll probably play wing to half forward. So he's already in there. They've got Dave, his brother, as well, that'll play wing. So I think he'll probably play half forward. But I get the feeling that Collingwood will probably end up higher than North Melbourne. So I feel like he'll have a bit more supply and a bit more impact early. But, it's much of a muchness. They're both going to be absolutely outstanding players.
Either you gentlemen got a question for him?
Why do you think the reason Johnson? What is the reason for Johnson dropping so far in the draft? Why did he slip so far? I know he was one of the only players that really dropped as far as He was supposed to be more highly touted than that, I guess.
Yeah, no, he was one of the more consistent players in the back half of the year. He had a bit of a slow start to the season in the waffle, and then had that outstanding first game against South Australia where they beat them. And then he was touted as that sort of top 10 pick. So my best guess is I feel that Erasmus had a lot of interest from other clubs, where I think that Johnson's interest came from clubs that would have already picked or that they knew they could get before. So when they heard it, it was a very late kind of call by the sounds of it, on the day of the draft. All of a sudden, there was a lot of news coming in that, Johnson might slide or they'd go Erasmus instead. And then he just sort of kept sliding. So it was very obvious. It was the most obvious pick of the draft when we came to night 2 and Fremantle had pick 21, who that was going to be, because, they were keen on him with, that pick 10. And he slid all that way, which was absolutely fantastic, because we've seen it before. Actually, I remember back in 2008 with Collingwood, both Steele Sidebottom and Dane Beams, they wanted with that pick 11. And it was the same thing. They were hoping that no one would pick Beams. So they went Sidebottom, and then they had to wait about 17 picks, and then he was still there. So it's that kind of almost playing chicken with the rest of the clubs. You're taking a risk. You're very, very nervous, sort of watching, waiting. Because the other thing they know is there might be a team that's interested in Johnson that all of a sudden trades up ahead of them. So they're only going off what they can see, which is what the live trading is meant to add. It's meant to add that sort of extra uncertainty for clubs, because a club could just suddenly trade in ahead of him and take him. And then they're like, oh, damn, so they were very lucky they managed to get him. But yeah, it was a bit of a risk. So I think from his form wise, he's one of those players. I see Johnson as one of those players that there isn't really anything particularly wrong with him. He doesn't necessarily have elite traits that some of the others have, but he's above average in nearly everything kind of thing. So he's just a really, really good player. But it's just, I think maybe there's some players that others saw with higher potential or had an elite trait here or there. And he was just really, really good across the board. So he's a great steal of that sort of selection. So I think that's great for Fremantle. I think that's really the reason. Everyone has their sort of preferences, and they took a risk knowing that the clubs that were keen on him probably weren't going to get him. So they just, they took the risk and he slid, which was lucky for the Dockers.
Okay. Who would you be a pro comparison to him as a player in the AFL right now?
Oh, see, this is the interesting thing with the comparisons, because it's always tough because they're all their sort of own sort of player. Like in terms of where they sort of play, sort of that nice inside outside balance, maybe the touch outside. He could almost, he could almost be like a bit of a Luke Parker, maybe the outside type thing, perhaps. But like, it's like they're always fraught with danger, because when I look at player comparisons, for example, I probably see like 5 or 6 different players that can kind of play a different role. So it's someone who I always prefer to sort of almost describe their traits, and then people can kind of make assumptions from that, because obviously the amount of footy that I see in terms of under 18s takes up my entire weekend. Like I'm probably watching 15, 16 games of these under 18s each week. So then you get back and watch the AFL and you see maybe a couple of games a week, that kind of thing. So you get to see a few players a lot, but in terms of my knowledge, I know that it's definitely in knowing the under 18s themselves inside and out, and then the AFL players you know about, and you can sort of say, yep, this is what they're good at, blah, blah, blah. But then to really know them in depth, to compare them, is probably not that level where I'm like, I can, talk for hours on, this player's good at this, and this is what they'll improve, because that's what you're watching the entire time. And then it kind of makes your own assumptions from that. But certainly, for me, I think he's someone who plays a midfield role. He might play as a wing and then go inside. He was quite a good contested ball winner last year. He spent more time outside this year, so he sort of drifted a bit away from that. So, but certainly that sort of outside ball winner who can win the inside ball when required. So he's definitely that midfielder. He's fairly clean. He's just really consistent across the board. Like I said, he doesn't have too many weaknesses as such. So I think that he's someone who could plug and play from fairly early on for the Dockers.
Awesome. That's great. And one of the things that I love about the Fox Footy broadcast is they have their bargain buys and their bolters. And one of the things that I noticed, especially late in the first round, was a lot of bolters. 4 bolters that I have written down. Campbell Chesser, who they had ranked 22nd, he goes 14th. Lee Gallier, who many people had early second round, going 14th, who was ranked 32nd. Tom Brown going 17th to the Richmond Tigers, was ranked 23rd, and Angus Sheldrick was ranked 35th and went to Sydney at 18. Of those 4 bolters, as Fox calls, who was your biggest shock that was drafted in the first round, and who's your guy that you would say is your best value, even though they were a bolter?
Well, for me, I think the biggest shock was definitely Lecalier. I think that he's just come from sort of nowhere. Like, last year, 12 months ago, because keep in mind he missed out last year because he was basically playing under 18s and, he had some highlights, things like that. This year he's had a really outstanding season with centrals in the sample. Everyone's sort of seen his highlights. He can leap, into space, basically. He got 107 running vertical leap, which is unheard of here, basically. He's just outstanding athletically. He's just so raw. So I think that's where a lot of clubs sort of pause on them, because he's still got to work on a lot of the fundamentals, like kicking, decision-making, that kind of thing. In terms of, he's got stuff that players just can't get, like his athleticism, like his ability to mark, like he's a great intercept mark. He can read the play, do all that. Like in terms of his defensive ability and his defensive IQ, it's incredible, like what he can do. It's just that offensive IQ. So between the decision-making and the skill, that kind of thing, that's what he's got to work on. So if you want to work it this way, that's probably at about that, say, if you're going A to F, it's probably at about a D, the offensive ability, but his defensive, probably that AA plus. So that's where you've got to weigh it up going, well, we know what he can do. Can we bring up that ability to be really high? Do we back ourselves in to be able to develop him so we can get that up? Even if it's not an A, even if it's, say, a B or something like that, then, he's basically all Australian with that. And there's a lot of defenders in that exact scenario who have sort of come up that might not have been as skillful or necessarily as good decision makers, but he's someone that has a lot of potential, and you can't teach the athleticism that he's got. Like, no one can kind of get to that. So he's definitely, from that point of view, was the biggest surprise, because I was expecting him sort of in that second round, but it's great for him. He can now head up there, which is really good for the Giants as well. So, and in terms of the best quality, I think Chesser is the standout for me. He was someone who I think is very underrated. He's had injuries. He's just a really skillful player. Like we talk about, he's probably the opposite to Aliir in many ways. He's got that offensive IQ down pat. Like, he's a great decision maker, really, really skillful. He wins a lot of outside balls, so I think that's probably the inside contested work is probably what they're looking at. Can he go in there? That's probably the question mark for clubs. But in terms of his ability, he loves to tuck the ball under the arm and run. Can play off half back, play off a wing. He can go inside, but it's mostly he's basically a wing half back. And yeah, he's just so skillful. So he's someone who will use the ball so well. And I think that suits West Coast very much. And we were lucky enough to actually talk to Campbell the day before the draft, actually. And I don't think he's expecting to go to West Coast, because we did ask him about that. And he goes, yeah, they chatted to me last week, but they didn't seem that interested, to be honest, kind of thing. Like, they just like, yeah, cool, we're chat, blah, blah. So they kept it under wraps. He's like, look, if I had to say, he thought he was going to Brisbane. And Brisbane did rate him in the top few selections they had. Like, they did rate Wilmot and Lowman pretty high. I think Wilmot was their top pick, but he's one that, yeah, he thought he was going to Brisbane. And he said, if not Brisbane, he said both Geelong and Carlton had committed to him. Like, they were saying, we're going to take you if you're there. We don't expect you to be there, but if you are, you will be. We'll take you. So that was really fascinating to hear from him. But yeah, he wasn't expecting to go to West Coast, which was really, really interesting, that even a day out from the draft, he didn't know where he was necessarily going. And it would have been a bit of a surprise for him on the night.
Now, I would love to circle back to Aliir for a second, just because that's definitely one of my bread and butter and stuff I'm definitely keyed in on is my GWS Giants. So I want to talk about this because there are two, or at least the three of their draft picks were pretty interesting. I love how they were kind of on either side of the spectrum, where they definitely were ahead of everyone else when it came to Lek, and when it came to someone like Josh there in the third, where they might have gotten lucky that he fell that far. So I love how they're on either side of the spectrum there. But I want Lek is super interesting to me, just for the points you mentioned. I love that he's a ball hawk when it comes to his intercept marks. And I think one of the things that I'm looking forward to most is this is also something that Adrian Caruso talked about, is that while it definitely was a stretch, I'm still okay with where he was taken, because their goals in that draft wasn't necessarily to take the top guy at that spot. They were definitely going for, they knew who they wanted, they knew the pieces they wanted, and they went after them no matter where they were in the draft. So that's why I was kind of okay with that. And I definitely love how they just got the big guy, because that's one of the things you've noticed from GWS is that they have a lot of talent. They don't really have size, you'll see sometimes they'll get out physicaled. And I guess I'm a good old fashioned gridiron fan, so I love physical sports and just in footy. So I'm glad they're finally gaining a little bit of size to that, and they also got a little bit of size added in their midfield with Finn Callahan as well. So what do you think about Finn?
Yeah, look, Finn was one who, coming into the year, we had kind of around that late first round, early second. Like, he was someone that had a lot of potential to grow. We weren't really sure what happened. He's actually one, I think, that did grow quite a bit from his under 16s days to his under 18s. Like, he was one that shot up from that early 180s to basically the early 190s, almost, like, kind of thing. So he's shot up quite a lot. So he became that sort of genuine average size mid to a really tall, sort of stronger mid. And he's just got like evasion that, is hard to match. Like, we talk about Aliir with his vertical leap, and Callahan's the same. Like, he just ankle breaks people, for lack of a better word, like that kind of thing. Like, he can just sidestep people with ease and get out of trouble. And he's sort of that really, really classy type player that is able to just get around, get through stoppages, and hit targets as well. Like, he's quite a skillful player. So I think that he's kind of got the complete package in that sense. There were a lot of question marks over his inside game, and that's probably the one thing that Horne-Francis had over him was that inside contested work. But for me, and I sort of spoke about that sort of second possession winner, he's another second possession winner. He's someone that I wouldn't want at the ground level. Like, I wouldn't want him burrowing down and handballing, because you can almost guarantee if he's the one handballing to someone else, he's probably giving it to someone who can't use it as well as he can, because he is such a good user. And he's got those athletic traits to be able to get out of trouble and sidestep and spin and do all those kind of tricks. And he doesn't mind running with it as well. So it is quite exciting to sort of see that. But yeah, like, he's someone who I think, he was the clear third pick by the time the other two were sort of done. And I know that Dacos sort of slipped a bit, but after Horne-Francis and Dacos, he was certainly the third pick. And from probably a few months out, even without Vic sort of finishing off the year as such, he was definitely emerging through the Sandringham Dragons program and that as a clear standout. So yeah, he's definitely a good pick, and he just adds to that midfield depth.
Absolutely. I can't wait to see him, especially when they already got a super young guy in Tim Taranto, kind of breakout year last year. You already know about Coniglio, so they're going to do some great stuff. And then with Leck, maybe it probably might take him a little bit longer to, get to the field and see real meaningful playing time, just because how you kind of spoke on, he is still a raw kind of player, but once he ends up getting there, would love to see how he kind of meshes there in the backfield with Sam Taylor as well. I just love the young talent that GWS is really pumping into the roster there. And so I'm super excited for the future. Maybe GWS can actually, they were able to make the finals last year. We'll see if they can actually do something with it this year and moving forward.
Hey, Ross, I'll just add the whole reason why y'all drafted him was because Sam Taylor got destroyed by Tom Hawkins in the finals.
Yeah. Let's not talk about that one as well, just because we could brush past that. But with when you have a guy like Sam Taylor, you have
I like him. I do like him.
Yes. And when they first played Geelong there in the regular season, he locked him down. And so I love you got a guy in Tim that plays really good man, and then a guy like Leck with his athleticism could be the guy that could slide off, play multiple guys a little more zone. So I like the little bit of mix that they're kind of bringing to their defense.
You guys are pretty interesting. You'd seen that you guys had went with 3 skipper rotation this year, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that'll be very interesting.
You might just have to go with Toby.
To each his own. Actually, I want to piggyback off of your question talking about Lake Alir, and I gotta ask, with the Sudanese with the Sudanese players coming into the league, which I think is absolutely awesome. I want to talk about one of the best stories out of all of them, and that's Mac Andrews. Pete, I mean, I know this kid is a very young developing player with a huge upside, a lot like Lake Alir, but I mean, NGA Academy, Melbourne misses out with him because of the new rules. Gold Coast gets what could be one of the best rucks potentially in this draft, or am I'm off kilter on that one?
No, like, he's definitely got a lot of potential. I think with Mac Andrew, he was someone who, coming into the year, he was probably similar to Callahan in the way that he came into the year where he was sort of that late first, early second, and a lot of Melbourne fans were kind of in the same boat that St Kilda were by the end of the year. Like, they were like, oh, we hope to get him. We're not sure. Like, he's very raw, not really, what's going to happen. I reckon by the end of his first game at round 2, most people were like, yeah, we're not going to get him, because he came up against Gippsland Power and he had like 22 touches, took a couple of marks, just had a massive amount of highlights, like 11 hit outs. He was just completely destroyed him. And for a ruck, like a complete raw ruck, to have that kind of stat line was just ridiculous. And from then on, he just kept getting better. Like, he's very similar. He's got that great athleticism, can leap above everyone, good hands. He's capable of getting around the ground too and providing an option. So I think that's something that's really different about him. Like, he's someone who, he's almost like that fourth midfielder in many ways, that he can actually cover the ground pretty well and be able to get that. So from an endurance standpoint and from a ground coverage standpoint, he's actually not as far away as a lot of, say, raw rucks might be, where that's usually their weakness. For me, I think for him, it's just getting a bit more, stronger. He's got to build up some strength, and he's got to get a bit more aggressive at times. But in terms of his overall game, he certainly ticks a lot more boxes. Like, he is raw, but he's still, like, if we're comparing to Aaliyah, for example, in terms of athleticism, they're both very, very, elite, basically, yeah. But he's sort of that more ready-made in that sense. Like, it's not that he's going to play this year. Like, he's not ready-made compared to the overall draft crop, but in terms of tools and rucks and things like that, he's more ready-made than others. So I think within, say, 2 or 3 seasons he'll play, where some rucks might not play for 3 or 4. Like, I wouldn't be shocked if he played late in the year next year, or this year, I should say, for us. But in terms of him, I think that within 2 seasons I could imagine him playing, all things going well. So, and I mean, obviously the Suns have still lost, like, obviously Jared Witts is coming back off an ACL, so he's still going to have some question marks. Like, you're always nervous when players come back off ACLs because you're not sure whether they're, going to be okay or whether they do it again, because that early on, that's usually what you're worried about. So getting that ruck depth in there, I think that he's going to be more ready-made than a lot of other players. So from a ruck perspective, so I think that he's someone who could definitely play a role. And he's certainly very, very exciting. He wins a lot of the ball, which is very, very good for someone of his size.
And now staying with Mac Andrew as well, am I kind of off on thinking that this kind of pick may be one of the most surprising ones to me? Not necessarily because it's not like Gold Coast didn't need a ruck, but just I guess the feeling that he's obviously still a developing talent. I don't think we've necessarily seen great evidence that Gold Coast is a club that can develop, let alone retain talent. So did that kind of catch you off guard a little bit?
Yeah, like, there's a bit of nervousness there, like in the sense that we obviously know Gold Coast history. They've had a lot of players walk out the door and go back to their home states or go back for success. I mean, even if you look at their best ever team, like, even in their short, 10 years they've been around, their best ever team is insane. The only issue is most of them have done it playing for other clubs. And that's the problem. Like, the fact that they were really great when they played for them, but they never all played at the same time. Like, you look at that team and go, that's a premiership team if they all played together. And we're talking within 10 years too. That's the thing. It's within 10 years. So they could have all played together. But, unfortunately, they just tend to leave. So that's why they started drafting guys like Lukosius and Rankin together and, Rao and Anderson. So that way you've got a couple of guys coming in together that can really, have those friendships there and build them up and try and drive the team forward. And also a lot of guys that are determined to win. Like, they want to win. They want to drive the culture. Like, players like Rao, he's going to be a gun regardless of where he goes. Like, he'll drive those standards. So I think that Gold Coast will eventually turn around. We've seen that they've got those coaches coming in, everything like that. I just think it's really important for Gold Coast because, for those who don't know, Gold Coast in Australia is the party city, basically. It's where, all the schoolies go, all the 18-year-olds go to party. It's open till like 11 o'clock at night, that kind of thing, every night. And yeah, there's a lot of partying going on. So for a lot of 18-year-olds that walk into a club, it would be tough to go to Gold Coast in the sense that it would be very distracting if you weren't 100% focused on footy, because there's a lot to offer there compared to other places. So I think from that perspective, and especially when the media isn't on you as much, because it's more of a rugby league state and rugby union state up there, so they're not as heavily focused, where if you're out at nightclubs in Victoria, most of the media will spot you or you'll find out about it, where in Gold Coast you can probably go almost, unnoticed kind of thing. So I think that's what they really need to turn around, like just building that culture and getting guys like Rao in will really help with the future guys that come in, like Mac Andrew coming through and things like that. And, they're able to get that in. And I think they got Charlie Constable as well late because of Greenwood going to North. So he's going to be an immediate slot in. And he was another really good kid that, he's got great leadership potential. So I think for them, it's almost like for Gold Coast over the last couple of years, it's been about getting those guys in. And they need to become that destination club. But to become a destination club, you need to get the kids in, because previously Gold Coast got either, for lack of a better word, the club's leftovers, the ones that were either outside their 22 and they wanted a senior spot, or delisted players. And the good ones they got were the ones that they overpaid massively, like the Gary Ablett and things like that they, gave ridiculous money to. And for Gold Coast now, it's about trying to get those really good players without having to overpay them. Because that's been the whole issue with Greenwood. Like the fact that, they had a lot of salary cap issues coming into this year. That's why they said they had to delist players and re-pick them up and put people on rookie lists and things like that. Which for me is unbelievable. The fact that, having salary cap trouble when you're right down the bottom of the ladder is bizarre. Like, at least Collingwood, when they had it, you're competing for a grand final and things like that, where Gold Coast down the bottom of the ladder, it just shows that they've had to pay that extra money to try and retain players. And for me, I think the first thing they've got to do is, get the right people in, get the success happening, and that will bring others in. So, I think they're on the right track, but then, we probably would have said that 3 or 4 years ago. So they're getting the players in, they've got the talent. Like, for many years, Gold Coast on paper has been good enough to make finals, but they just haven't for one reason or another. So for me, I think that, now's the time they've got to really knuckle down, and it comes within the playing group, how serious they want to be. So, because I think on paper, they're not bad. Like, I don't necessarily think they're immediately a finals team, but I think they're good enough to push for finals and at least challenge the top teams when on their day. So I think that they've got to just progress to the next step. And hopefully McAndrew can develop there. I know that, he's a right fit for them. And maybe it's backing themselves in to do it and really change that culture by getting them in.
Well, that's good news for all 28 of those Gold Coast supporters.
Yeah, and just to translate, I'm not sure if you two know it. Schoolies, the easiest way to equivalent it to US is spring break.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah.
I was getting context clues.
Yeah, I was like, as he was talking, he was helping me out here, but I just wanted to make sure he got his point through before I said, it's basically like spring break for the college and high school kids there. So that's kind of the easiest way to explain that. So
I remember the parts of the Gold Coast, especially with the troubles that those Richmond guys, Sydney and Cullen were having was back in 2020.
Oh boy. Here we go. So we've had our GWS questions. Let's switch harbor side since everybody knows I am a Sydney supporter, and I got to ask this. Maybe this is more fun. Is the Sydney supporters are absolutely elated to get Corey Warner out of the West. So I gotta say that again. I'm sorry.
I was happy about that too for y'all, man.
It is very, very interesting. Can you kind of explain to me what type of player Corey is, and is he at all anything like his brother, or is he kind of a different animal when it comes to how he plays?
Yeah, well, he certainly looks a lot like his brother, but he has. We've been told many times by West fans or West Australian fans over there that he doesn't like being referred to as Chad's brother. So avoid doing that as much as possible. We get told that. But yeah, Corey, look. He's not quite as much inside as Chad. Like, he's not necessarily just an absolute bull where Chad was at junior level. Where Corey is more of your balanced midfielder. He can win his own ball, can go outside. He's probably got a touch more skill than Chad. Like, he's a bit cleaner. So, I mean, it's one of those things where you weigh up between maybe a little less of winning your own ball, hard ball, but a little bit cleaner with the ball. So, obviously, Chad's really clean with his hands, but Corey's better by foot. So, he's someone who can also play half forward. He can play half back. He wins a lot of the ball. Like, he's one of those players that probably would have gone higher if he'd kind of played like that sort of consistent spot. He kind of got thrown around a little bit, but he's generally that midfielder that, he's just a natural ball winner. And he could play outside or inside. He's pretty consistent across the board. Like, he had a really, really good season this year, and that really brought him forward, and had a good carnival with WA. And I think that he's a really good get. He's not the same as Chad. Like I said, he's not quite as inside, but he adds a bit more around the midfield. So, and I think considering with your other picks too, you didn't need another insider. So, because you did need inside midfielders over the last couple of years, and you've been building them up, getting them in. So, I think having that sort of balanced player who can also play other positions is really, really good.
Awesome. And I think that's kind of the things that I've noticed, that everybody said that Corey's just a little bit different. And I just kind of wanted to get your take on that. So he's definitely one. And then adding Angus Sheldrick, who is a raging inside bull of a mid, from everything that I keep hearing, is I think Sydney really did kind of bolster that midfield and kind of bring in the youth, because they know with Joey Kennedy and Luke Parker getting up there in age that you're going to have to replace these guys. So I think Sydney did quite well when it comes to stocking up their midfield depth. Not that they were lacking in it at all this last year with Blakey coming, Justin McInerney coming in. So I'm the youth in the midfield at Sydney is very, very, very bright that I can see.
Yeah, they had the good draft, so I'm not too happy about that.
Y'all just lost just Hewitt and Dawson, and that was it from the midfield.
Yeah,
year?
well, Hewitt's was your defensive minded kind of tagger that was still could win the footy. Dawson was kind of he was a flux. He was kind of a wing, and then he was halfback. So he was kind of constantly in flux in positions. He kind of ended the year more of as a wing because of his kicking ability. So his loss, I think, is going to be very interesting. I know if you ask most Sydney fans, this is what we would consider the greatest opportunity to see the big mystery and enigma that is Will Gould, who I think a lot of Sydney fans were excited to get him when we drafted him, but he hasn't seen senior action. So, I mean, and I don't know. And Pete, I know you probably, I mean, when Will Gould was coming up, I mean, what was his strengths? I mean, he was a halfback, or was he fullback?
Yeah, he was definitely a rebounding halfback, very offensive. I always say, like, Will Gould was probably the most interesting profile I've ever written, in the sense that when we did color coding for each of the things, like between his skill, footy, all that kind of thing, the word natural footballer could not be better to describe him, because his disposal, his, intercept marking, his decision making, his footy IQ, all kind of elite, absolutely ridiculous. Like, a lot of that was outstanding. He was a leader. Like, you tick nearly every box. On the other hand, his athleticism was terrible. Like, there was nothing, he finished last in basically every single test you could think, to be fair. He's an absolute outstanding talent. Like, I love watching him play, but, his agility was incredibly slow, finished behind the rucks. His speed, he doesn't have that breakneck speed. His endurance, despite playing senior footy, wasn't that high. Like, he was quite low. I think he got in the 19s for the sort of beep test yo-yo. Yeah, I think it was, the yo-yo for what they had. But, he was in the 19, so he's very, very low for that. So, in many regards, that was what held him back. Like, even though he was playing senior footy, which was remarkable given that was what he tested at, but that's probably the reason behind it. Like, it was just getting his fitness up and things like that. When he comes on, I sort of pictured Gould being the guy that comes in and then everyone goes, why the hell wasn't he in here earlier? Like, he's clearly got ridiculous talent, and he does, but it's more his fitness and maybe, bringing that speed or agility up, so that, not that you can really build on it a great deal, but maybe the point where it's not diminishing what he can do on the field. Like, that's the other thing that they're probably trying to do, just build that kind of aspect up and be able to do it. And he's not quite the same as Dawson. Like, he's got that lovely long kick. Like, he can hit targets from so far out, and he's just so brilliant with the ball. But yeah, it's just a case of, if he's playing half back and he's got to work up, does he have the fitness to run back and that kind of thing? Like, it's things like this that I think, or, if he comes up against a quick forward, he'll get caught on the back, like that kind of thing. So that would be my estimation as to why he hasn't played. The fact that maybe they're trying to build those kind of things up, and he's that kind of awkward height as well. Like, he's an absolute beast. Like, he's a monster. He's only about that. He was 191, 182 or something like that. So he's not quite key position, not quite small. He's in that middle. And generally when they're in that middle, you've kind of got to be quick kind of thing, or athletic, which he isn't. So for me, I think he's the kind of guy that you almost want kicking out in many regards, that maybe plays deep and can just, penetrate 50, 60 meters, hit a target up the ground. He's that kind of guy. So he's not probably going to be the guy that's going to run a great deal with it. Or if he does, he'll rotate between that and deep. But he's someone who, when he's got the ball, he can do amazing things with it. So I'm definitely excited for when he does play. And I do think he's going to be one of those that everyone's like, why wasn't he playing earlier? because if he's built up those athletic attributes, or at least certainly the endurance and perhaps some of the speed to a little extent, then yeah, certainly that's the reason why he wouldn't have played yet.
Yeah, makes sense. And Jake Lloyd's been our kick out guy, so I kind of could see why that one spot that I think would fit him really well is kind of taken up. So I'm one of those that I think list managers really earn their money when it comes to later picks. And you know me when I asked this last year. So I'm one of those. Come the third and fourth round, who's your pick that you think could potentially play round one this up year that was drafted late in this draft?
Yeah, playing round one would be interesting. Look, I've got a few names here because I knew it was going to come. In terms of the players that I rate, I think that the one most likely probably to play early might be Zach Taylor at Adelaide. I think that he's probably the one most likely to play from that sort of third, fourth round. He's, a great small, high upside. I saw him up in Queensland at the under-16s champs, and he was a kid that straight away I went, yeah, I really like him. I am sort of being a shorter guy. I do favour like the shorter guys, and he's quite small, but I do like the way that he goes about it. Like, he's very skillful, got a good leap on him, got a lot of talent. I think I'm going to put him in the Ariel Goulden basket of too short, so they don't rate him as highly, which I think is ridiculous because I think I remember saying to you last year before Goulden played that he was one that I really, really liked, and vindication when he came out. So I think Taylor's got a lot of potential, the same kind of thing where he's got that ability. He may not be quite as advanced as Goulden was last year, but I think he's got a lot of potential. So I think he's someone who will play early on. In terms of guys around that mark, Blake Howes, he's ended up at Melbourne, so he won't necessarily play round one, but he's that versatile forward. I think he's good in the air, can play wing. He's someone who has potential to kind of slot in multiple positions. And if he wasn't at Melbourne, I feel like he'd probably play pretty early. But obviously he's got to wait for his chance there. Depending on his fitness, I feel like Cooper Murley at Collingwood, if he can get fit, will play early because this kid was probably one of the steals of the draft, I feel. And I was absolutely elated to get him as a Pies fan because, on the night, I remember we were coming up to 2 picks and someone asked me when we were doing our telecast, said to me, oh, which 2 do you want for this? I said, Murley and Draper, if we can. And then they picked them both. So it was I had to kind of compose myself when we got both of them. But Murley, look, he's an under-16 All-Australian. He unfortunately was injured basically all of this year. He's got real high potential. He's a bit short. So again, people sort of judge him a little bit based on that, a little bit of height because he loves the contested ball, but he can play a bit outside. So, but yeah, he's generally been that sort of inside ball winner, which isn't great for someone at sort of 178, although, Matt Rowell was around that too. So, but I think he'll probably be that balanced midfielder that plays through there. And the other one that I thought won't necessarily play round one, I don't expect him to, but in terms of the slider, and I want to mention this for you, Donnie, was Lockie Rankin, who I absolutely love. I think he's potentially top 30 pick on ability. Again, we're going with the short thing, but he's just so dangerous in front of goals, very skillful, clean. He's got a massive upside. So yeah, I think Rankin was probably of those really late picks, probably the steal outside top 50. So yeah, definitely I think he's someone who's got a lot of upside for the future, even if he doesn't play round one. I think he's got great upside to play in the future years.
Fantastic. So another one that I like going to, and I know it's not always easy, especially when you have teams like Gold Coast that only have one pick. So I go in all with the talent that was picked up in this draft. Who do you think who improved their team the most with their draft picks? And who do you think maybe left a few players on the table?
Yep. So for me, I sort of made a note. There were 4 teams that I sort of really, really liked their drafts. And I'll quickly just run through them each, which was in alphabetical order: Brisbane, Collingwood, Fremantle, Richmond. They were the 4 that I liked the most. And the reason being, probably Fremantle had the highest quality, but they also had the highest picks. So in a way, they got their key forward in Amos. They've got Erasmus and Johnson to add to the midfield for when Fife is able to play forward. So I think from that, they ticked every box. So for me, you look at that selection, you go, yeah, you can't fault them. They were brilliant. In terms of Richmond, they won because they had a million picks that they could choose from. And The only question I have, I love all their picks. Like, I was a big fan of Tom Brown. Gibcus, I really love. Sonsi and Banks, I think, are very underrated, and even Clark. The only question I have about that is Brown, Sonsi, Banks, and Clark are all outside players. They're all outside running players. So even though that is what Richmond needs, they picked up 4 of the same player, or not quite the same, because Brown plays half back and say, Clark can play forward. But in many ways, their traits within their game style are very similar. So that's the only question I have, picking up that many players, almost like you're hedging bets as to, perhaps surely some of these guys will make it. And I think they've all got potential to make it. But I think that, Sam Banks being injured this year was really underrated. So they were lucky to get him. And Gibcus being the best sort of key defender as such, a pure key defender, was really good. In terms of, obviously, Collingwood got a few steals, as I mentioned, really liked what they did, Draper and Murley. And Dacos is, realistically a steal at pick 4. So I think what they've got, they'll have players that are setting them up. And their last 2 years after that disastrous trade period have been really good. Their last 2 drafts, I've liked what they've done. And their trade period this year. So they've sort of rebounded. Where the other team, Brisbane, is the one that I quite like, that I feel like not enough teams are talking about, because some people sort of thought they took them a bit too high. Wilmot was their top pick that they wanted once they were outside the top 10. So to get him, he's just a fantastic leader. Like, he's someone who will potential future captain, maybe, that kind of thing, like coming off halfback. He's just such a great user. Kai Lowman, I'd heard that he was going to go somewhere in that sort of 25 to 35 range, which was a lot higher than other people thought at that time. But, his upside's huge. He's still got a few things to work on, like his work rate, things like that. But he's got a lot of athleticism, and he's someone who, when I watched him, I was kind of like, he doesn't have a lot to fault from a pure game perspective. So I think he's going to be absolutely massive. And then getting James Tunstall really late, I think that he's underrated, like someone who he's not the flashiest player. He's sort of that, as we like to put it, bang as a mash type thing. He does his job. He wins the ball. He's an accumulator. He can play that inside. Like, he can really play inside and win that contested stuff, where Wilmot and Lowman will be more of those outside types. So I feel like what they got, even though they didn't get a tall, because I know that they were keen on getting a tall in that sort of draft, they were able to get those 3 players and trade in picks next year for Ashcroft, who's right now sort of sitting as the prime position for that first spot. So I think that they've done really well between their trading and drafting. So probably from an underrated perspective, they're right up there. But overall, definitely have to go Fremantle, I think, is the top pick. But in terms of the other teams that I was that I sort of look at and I wasn't sure about, there was sort of a couple. Obviously, Carlton, in the sense that Jesse Motlop's a gun, but only picked up the 1. So obviously, it would have been good to see him pick up maybe 1 or 2 more. But we'll see how they go with the picks over there. Sorry about that. But yeah, disappointed. But yeah, like, you're quite right. Like, Jesse Motlop's a star, which I think also touching on the fact that the bidding for him was different to everyone else, because Fremantle had to match outside the top 40, because he's a part of the Metropolitan NGA Academy for Fremantle. It was one of those things that was really confusing, but everyone's going to be outside the top 40 this year. So it basically makes the top end NGAs pretty irrelevant in many senses, like in terms of club alignments. But yeah, he was one of them. The other one was Geelong, because, like, not that I didn't like their picks, but I think that they've sort of rolled the dice and gone for a lot of high upside but high risk players. So full credit to them. They had to pick up a lot, because their list is really, really old. Like, they're definitely like the oldest club without me even having to check the stats, I'd say. Kruger's going to be a great player. He's someone, though, that hasn't had a lot of exposure compared to some others, but there were clubs that were really keen on him. Cooper White was another one that, really raw. I wasn't expecting him necessarily to go, but they took him late, which was good. Nevitt has the potential to be a top 10 player or sort of drift away. Like, he's one of those high risk, high reward players. Conway's pretty consistent as a ruck and fills the need. So that was a very good pick for them. But as a whole, Geelong, like, I feel like they got a lot of players, what they need. They just went with the high risk, high reward, and a lot of locals too, like a lot of the Falcons. So that was good for them, which was good. And otherwise, Essendon were the other one that sort of had that risk. Like, Hobbs is consistent as you like. I love Ben Hobbs. He's a great inside ball winner. But then you had Alistair Lord, who I think has a lot of upside. Again, a bit risky, because it's going a lot off his combine and late season form, but he's got a lot of potential. But Garrett Mcdonough, who is someone who could play early on for Essendon, but a lot of clubs weren't sort of expecting him to go, I don't think, because he's obviously kind of came out of the blue, didn't get a combine invite. He played with Richmond in the VFL. And based on what I heard, that even Richmond's VFL didn't think he was going to go. Like, they were just expecting him to come up to training, and then they heard his name read out. And they were a bit surprised, like, oh, like, you know, everyone's thrilled for him because he's quite good at the nights, but he's had to do it the hard way and go through the system. So, look, I hope he does do really well. It was just more of a bit of a surprise because I don't think anyone saw that kind of coming. So, I think from an overall perspective, he was probably the big surprise of the night to go. But, yeah, good luck to him. And, yeah, they got Hobbs as well, who's the consistent one. But that's probably a good sort of summary of the teams that I really liked and the ones that I didn't necessarily not like because it's a bit early, but the ones that I think probably took more risks than some of the others.
I know one of the things that kind of scared me the most after the draft was just seeing a really good Richmond team getting that much better, especially with 5 picks in the top 30. I don't think they're going to be going away anytime soon here now, are they?
No, I think they're going to be around for a little while. The only question, of course, will be how their key position hold up. Robbie Tarrant has bought them an extra couple of years because that's the only other thing. If you look at their key position ends, they've lost a lot in that key defence. So they've had to get Robbie Tarrant in. Otherwise, they were going to be pretty exposed against the bigger clubs, like bigger forwards. And then you look up the forward end. Rewalt's not going to be around forever. Obviously, Tom Lynch has still got a few more years, but Rewalt isn't going to be around forever. So he's probably only got a few years left at most, maybe only one. So they're not as well positioned because they, of course, lost Chol to Gold Coast now. So, and Coleman Jones is gone. So they've lost because that is what success does. Success will get rid of the depth players. They'll go to other clubs. And then when that club comes around to need to rebuild, they've pretty much got to do it from scratch. So they've been able to do it for this draft. The only thing, as I sort of said, was they've all picked very similar players, bar Gibcus. Gibcus will be a great selection, fits a need, but very similar players. So they've sort of rebuilt their midfield and outside ability. It'll just be that question of the key position depth, I think, going forward. I think they're going to be around the mark again this year. It'll be interesting to see whether their older players will perform because I think some of them dropped off at times. Obviously, Cochin and even Rewald at times, like they sort of dropped off. They had some great games, but yeah, they sort of started to slow down. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. But yeah, like Richmond, I think are going to be a pretty good team. But much like, I mean, when Brisbane won their 3 in a row, about now it's almost bloody 20 years ago, when they won 3 in a row, they fell away for ages. But at the end of the day, as we know how hard they are to win, it's kind of like you take 3 flags to drop off for 10 years and not make finals, like that kind of thing, because they're so hard to win. And Richmond may well go through the same thing. The only thing is, of course, you don't want to be necessarily like Geelong, which even though they've won their flags, you know, a little while ago, you don't want to bulk up on all the older players and then not win anything. And that's why I feel like this year's probably the last year for Geelong to win one. So for me, they're the big concern that if they don't win it this year coming, then I think they're in a lot of trouble because they've obviously haven't been able to bring in those young kids and a lot of them have left and things like that. So they've sort of rolled the dice with everything, trying to get there, but we'll see what happens because, you know, a lot can change in 12 months with trading and drafting, things like that. So, but yeah, I think Richmond will be thereabouts and certainly I sort of expect them to bounce back and make finals again.
I think it's also worth noting that Dustin Martin might dedicate a season to his father this season. God rest his soul. So you never know. Richmond definitely. After I heard that, I was like, man, I really thought Richmond might be falling off, but I'm like, man, I'm probably gonna put him in my 8 this season, man.
It'll be very, very interesting. And the biggest thing that I would go with, Pete, is that only 65 draft picks. So again, another light year. Again, I think COVID again kind of affected how many players are drafted, how many kids are there. So I love looking at this a little bit. Is who are some of the kids that didn't get taken that we look at maybe as being supplemental picks or kids that are going to come in later or maybe even make it to next year's draft?
Yeah, it's quite interesting to see what will happen with that because for me, we sort of in our top 50, 48 of them went, which is pretty high for what I kind of expected. from a perspective of those kids who in many ways we were kind of thinking would go. So for me, I don't think there was a great deal that missed out, but there were a few that I think by the end of the year we were kind of like, yeah, that probably should have gone, like with the couple. And like in my whole list, I wasn't expecting that. Lewis Rayson was one who I thought that out of Glenelg, he was a kid who I thought might go. He's someone who's had a lot of upside, a lot of potential. Josh Brown's another from WA. He was someone who he had a lot of the ball, but I think that was a case of he played a lot of Colts footy, which isn't really regarded that highly in terms of overall scheme of things, like compared to your seniors or even your NAB league and that kind of thing. So I think he was another one that was unlucky not to go. From Victoria, I think Charlie Molan was one who I really liked. Again, like maybe it's the upside because for me, he's just really consistent. Like he doesn't really have any weaknesses. He's just a bit, again, meat and potatoes, like sort of bangers and mash, that kind of real consistent, not many weaknesses, but not a great deal of upside. So perhaps he's someone that got left on the table for that reason. He can play anywhere. So he's got a lot of potential in that regard. So he's someone who could easily come in the future days. But yeah, I think that that's a fair few of those that I was sort of expecting might get drafted, but then they didn't. So realistically, we only had a few that weren't quite, didn't quite make it on. But as a whole, I think it went a lot more to, I guess, script, if you like, compared to what we were expecting or what we've had in past years.
You wouldn't throw Josh Cripps in that same category? No.
Look, I think he got built up a lot because of the surname. I think that he definitely could, but I feel like that was a case of mainstream media also jumping on the name a lot. So he is like, he's got potential to get drafted, but he is, despite what test results might say, inflated over there a little bit. He's not that athletic. He's quite immobile when it comes to agility and things like that on field. So I think that was we know that, Paddy isn't exactly the quickest athlete going around. That's probably his bigger weakness. Right. But his brother's a bit taller. He's sort of that size where he plays as a ruck but can play key position. I think he's got potential to make it. He's just got a bit of improving to do. So he was someone I sort of viewed as a potential rookie kind of thing. So he wasn't someone I was expecting to go in the main draft, but I thought could go as a rookie if things went well. So I think he could be someone in the future to watch for. But I definitely think that, like a lot of kids with those sort of surnames, he got built up to be, a really high pick when realistically, if you watched him on field, he still had a lot to work on and a lot to build on. So I think that he was definitely more of a rookie look from our perspective anyway.
Okay.
All right. And for me, I love, and I asked this last year, and I know I'm going to have fun with this one is next year's draft. I know you're already working on it. I know you've been watching these kids for so long. Can you give us just a few names, 2 or 3 names that you think will really prick our ears in next year's draft?
Yeah. So, Will Ashcroft's the one to keep an eye on. He's going to likely be the number 1 pick at this stage. Like he's attached to a club through that Brisbane academy. Oh, not for Brisbane Academy. He's technically Sandy. He's Brisbane father-son. And of course, Marcus Ashcroft, who won the 3 flags with the Lions. And he's someone who I think will be one to definitely have to watch for. You've got George Wardlaw, who's out of the Oakley Chargers. So again, these are Metro kids who are, again, Metro is going to be strong again. If we look at that, he's someone to keep an eye on. One kid I really like out of SA is Harry Lemmy. He played a bit with the under-19s SA, and he looks a lot like Jack Lukosius. He's got a lovely long kick. He's been playing forward. He's got a lot of potential in that regard. So I think that he's someone who has plenty to sort of improve on and give, but he's a key position player, which I think that's what we've got to look forward to in this draft coming up, is the fact that there's key position players that are going to be an abundance going around. Isaac Keeler who was a part of the Crows Academy. Unfortunately, he's going to go far higher than the top 40. So it's going to be like a Ugle-Hagen, like he could even go the top few picks. And yeah, he's out of WA ruck for next year, so one to keep an eye on. And Jed Buslinger as well. He's probably got one of the better names as people sort of come up with. He's a key defender out of WA as well. So it's a good sort of balance, but definitely I think key position players are at a premium next year. So I think a lot of clubs wanted to hold their picks because they could get a really high quality key position where the last few years it's probably been predominantly midfielders bar a few. So it'll be good to see a few more taller guys making their way up the top based on what we've seen this year.
Awesome. Well, gentlemen, I don't know about you, but that's pretty much all I have for Pete. And Pete, again, absolutely fantastic. You are incredibly knowledgeable. It's so much fun to chat with you. And as I said, guys, you can't stump this guy. You ask him a question, he's got answers. He's got answers for days.
He does.
He sounds like me trying to talk football sometimes, but even worse.
Yeah.
Man. I love it. Pete, we really appreciate your time as always, Fantastic. I love being able to finally come on and join, just be able to listen to the genius firsthand, essentially, just try to pick up as much as possible, as much as I could stuff into this brain of mine.
Yeah, no, like for sure. Like it's a lot of fun that I do, and it is quite rare because not a lot of people do what I and sort of Wiki Me Central do. Like obviously it's probably the equivalent for you guys going to watch college basketball, for example, all year round, and then knowing when the draft comes around who the players are. It's essentially the same thing. Like I'm watching so much under 18s footy, so by the time the draft comes around, we know all the players in detail. We've watched them for quite a few years, and it's not just starting from when they first kick a ball this year. We've seen them through the 16s and 17s, although the last 2 years has been challenging. So next year will be quite interesting because a lot of those championships have been cancelled over the last 2 years. So we're probably going in with a little less knowledge than we have in the past, but then it's the same for literally everyone, including recruiters, because they haven't been able to see them because they just haven't played. So next year could be very, very interesting, and we're looking forward to it because there could be a lot of movement compared to now to when we get to the draft, just because, there's a lot of kids that just haven't had the chance to play. So the top end ones we've seen, but there's always bolters that come up that could really impress early on.
Definitely. I mean, I finally figured it out, Ross. I figured out who this guy reminds me of: a more experienced and more knowledgeable Mel Kiper.
Ooh, yep.
He is Mel Kiper
compliment.
of the AFL for absolutely
compliment.
sure. So it's absolutely fantastic. Gentlemen, I hope you appreciated this. Again, keep an eye out. Rookie Me Central. They are on Twitter. They have their own website. You can check all of their information out. He's got several, not just Pete, he's got several guys on his staff, and they're absolutely incredible. I've reached out to all of them. They've been incredibly kind. If I have a question about a draft, I remember asking Michael, one of them, about Lear before it, because full disclosure, Ross, I really wanted Lear as their second round draft pick. I loved the way the kid was playing. So when I saw GWS take him, there was part of me was very disappointed that he didn't fall into the second round. But
I'm glad we reached.
But it was very easy to chat with them. You could ask them a question that they know so much. So it's a great thing. So anybody that's listening to this, Rookie Me Central, it is an incredible website. They are on Twitter. It's easy to get a hold of these guys, and they're so knowledgeable. They put a draft guide out for the draft. Pete knows I was bugging him all the time. When's the guide coming out? When's the guide coming out? Because I wanted to read it. And it is such great information. So Pete, thank you again so much. I'm glad that you were able to join us today and help these two gentlemen learn a little bit more about what you do and the great knowledge that you have about all of these young kids coming into the AFL this next year.
No, absolutely. Always enjoyed chatting footy, so happy to have a chat.
Thank you, sir.
Awesome.
I appreciate it. Excited for next time.